see some familiar faces. I'm Chris Erickson from Lake Placid Public Brewery, one of the NYSBA board members, and welcome to this presentation by Chris Shepard. Chris Shepard, or Christopher Shepard, my mom would say the same thing about me, Christopher. Christopher Shepard is senior editor at Beer Marketers Insights. He writes and edits, follows trends, and analyzes data for that company's family of beer industry trade publications. As an editor of craft-focused newsletter, The Craft Brew News, for over 12 years. He's followed craft beer's ups and downs closer than most, with a keen eye for how that trajectory fits into the overall alcohol beverage industry and broader consumer trends. Have any of you in here heard Christopher speak before? Morgan has.
Oh, fine. You don't have to.
That's it. I have a bridge. He's a great presenter. He'll give some wonderful insights. He likes to answer questions, and this hour is going to go by in about 5 minutes. So, without further ado, Chris Shepard. Yeah.
Thanks for coming on this afternoon and wanting more data. Imagine sort of what I think is going to happen in the next hour or so is I'm going to take sort of all the negative points that Bart talked about this morning, go way deeper into like why they're so awful, and then just forget all the good stuff. So yay, let's have some fun. There is beer up front. I will say that again. There's beer up front if you need it. You might need it. This might be the only place there's beer. We install it based on. So yeah, I'm Chris Shepard, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm from New York, so I live down in Rockland County, and so it's always very easy and a joy for me to come up and hang out with you folks here. But I've been giving a talk, essentially this talk, a little bit different, a handful of times in the last 6 months or so, and I just have to warn you, it's not great. Like a lot of the numbers, a lot of the trends these days are really tough, and I understand that, and a lot of businesses are having a really difficult time right now trying to figure out how to navigate this period. I am going to try to make that as sort of light and fun as I can, which is not me trying to be insensitive. But it's just partially because it's rough reporting on the industry these days. Like, I feel that. And if this like resonates with you at all, let me know. If it doesn't, like, please let me know, because I'm always looking for bright spots, like what is working. And I do hope to take plenty of time for Q&A. I will speed through, oh, that's the other thing I should say. This deck is yours, so if you don't have to take pictures of the slides or anything, like, it'll be yours. I'll make sure Paul has it for all the members. Give me your card, or like take my email down at the end, shoot me a note, and I will get you this deck immediately. So you don't have to worry about trying to like copy down all the numbers or take pictures or anything. I make this deck so that you can take it and keep it and run away with it and dig deeper. If you are not familiar with Beer Marketers Insights, just in case, quick spiel. We've been around for 53 years. We've been covering the beer industry the whole time. We have 5 newsletters. They're all paid subscriptions, but I will totally plug our free weekly digest, which comes out every Monday. It's totally free. It's just like a quick roundup, quick summary of like the news of last week, right? Get your week started with like, what the heck happened that week? Couple conferences, webinars, special reports, so forth. Total beer industry, U.S. shipments down 3.5% last year. Got to start with the real good stuff. So I will talk a bit about beer, and then we'll dig into craft. And again, what we know now, based on the information we know now, and it's still pretty early in the year, and these numbers will be revised. But right now, it looks like we had the worst year in the U.S. beer industry since Beer Marketers Insights has been in business. We've never tracked a decline of more than 3% in total U.S. beer volume, which is sort of wild, especially considering the size of it. right? Usually when it's like the 1% range, up or down, give or take. However, part of this is a little bit sort of what the data is. Like I said, these precise numbers will be revised. Because as you can sort of see, like in 2020 and 2021, we had pretty notable increases. The industry was up about 1.5% each of those years. So we really just sort of gave that back. And part of the reason why we gave it back is because it wasn't real. Those increases were a little bit artificial, I'm saying. So part of it was 2020 volume that was in kegs that got dumped but never was sort of reported. There was a ton of hard seltzer volume that sat in wholesaler warehouses in late 2020 and was not ever sold and also had to be destroyed that might not be fully accounted for. And then, of course, in 2021, just ahead of the 2022 price increases for a lot of the larger suppliers in the country, wholesalers like loaded up. December 2021 was a huge, huge month to beat those price increases, right? So a lot of those gains in 20 and 21 were sort of fake. So we gave that back last year. That's part of the reason why that total number is so bad, right? So it's not as bad as it looks, which is another theme that I've been thinking about lately a lot. Meanwhile, inside of that, you can see the purple bar craft. As we estimate it, we have it down about 1.2 million barrels, about 4.5%, which is a whole lot worse than Bart told you this morning. It was like, BA craft, flat. If you want me to try to reconcile that, we can do it privately when I'm not on the record, as it were, because it's a little bit confusing. I have to say I don't fully understand. This is the first time we've ever been like this far apart in terms of our trends. We measure craft a little bit differently, so we include the acquired brewers, right? All the AB craft, all the acquired Molson Coors craft, but we don't have like Blue Moon and Shock Top in there. So they should line up a little bit better than they do this year, which is, again, but I will talk about a little bit later in a moment, like how we got there. But that's back under 2018 volume, right? So that's craft volume in the US are back to 2018 levels, except there are like a couple thousand more breweries in the country at this point. Imports got back to really being the growth driver last year. Most of that is Mexican imports. And then the yellow bars, as you can see, that's a combination of FMBs, including hard seltzers, and hard cider. As Bart mentioned this morning, cider's been having a tough time, but the smaller suppliers have been doing way better. But in aggregate, so that group was down last year, but it's obviously sort of a huge grower, like went from a really tiny piece back 10 years ago to a much larger chunk of the industry. This is one data set we're pointing a lot to today, shipments, total barrels, BBLs. The other data set that I would be pointing to a lot is the off-premise scan data, right? This is IRI, which is now called Circana, which is basically your grocery stores, your convenience stores, all that off-premise when it's scanned, right? So I call it scan data. This is by segment. And a few things that I want to point out here. So that top line, total beer, cider, FMB, by dollars, like up 0.8%, but by volume, down 5, right? That's that price increase. Average price per case of beer across the total industry up about 6% last year. Bigger price increases than we've really seen before. Other things I want to pay attention to, the top 3 lines there, 3 sort of big beer high-end segments, or the sort of higher price segments, imports, craft, and super premium, where craft struggled far more than the other 2 in the off-premise data last year, supermarkets and convenience stores. The other interaction I want you to look at is right in the middle, hard seltzer and FMBs. Hard seltzer way down last year, FMBs making up for most of that. And FMBs, flavored malt beverages, that's your Mike's Hard. Twisted Tea is the biggest brand in that segment. We're also seeing a bunch of new brands enter in that segment, like the Simply Spiked Lemonade, Hard Mountain Dew in some states, et cetera, et cetera. Non-alc at the bottom, really good growth, really tiny, half of 1% in this data. So put it together and look at the top suppliers in the industry, right? The big folks, the 12 largest suppliers in beer in the US last year. Most of them declined, right? All but 2 of the largest suppliers in the country declined last year. Constellation is Corona, Modelo, the biggest importer of Mexican Mexican beer in the country. And the other is Curie Lion, which is New Belgium and Bell's. Bell's did not grow last year. All of this growth is New Belgium. And you're gonna get really tired of me talking about New Belgium today. AB and Molson Coors, the two largest, down about mid-single digits last year. They're early estimates. They will be revised slightly, but not by a whole lot in terms of the actual numbers. So their volume down, again, domestic tax pays, cycling that big load in December 21. Tax paid volume, which is all beer that is basically taxed, was brewed in the US and sold in the US, was down 15% in the month of December in 2022. That is sort of unfathomable. Meanwhile, you have Mark Anthony, Mike's, White Claw, and Boston Beer, Twisted Tea, Truly, Sam Adams, and Dogfish Head, of course. They have been flip-flopping the last couple of years. Truly had a terrible year last year. White Claw had a great year last year, or a better year last year, so they flipped again. And then, again, I put the off-premise trends, the volume trends over on the right, so you can compare that to the total. Off-premise was worse than the total. There was still some on-premise recovery, draft recovery, people coming back to bars and restaurants a little bit still last year. So the off-premise was worse than the total in most cases, yeah.
Who's HUSA?
Husa, I'm so sorry. Heineken USA.
That's one.
I should remember, because Heineken would fit there. Husa, Heineken USA, which is mostly Heineken. That does not include Lagunitas volume, which is owned by the same parent company, Heineken, but kept separate from the Heineken import company in the US. Real complicated. And again, it's like, how much are things going to be revised? Right, so if you look at that total, that includes exports, the 210 million barrels is what that is really. That number, as the TTB gets more information, because we base that estimate on basically what the government knows, as smaller brewers report, and maybe report late, and they sort of, TTB revises things, and as the year goes on, it won't be till a year from now that we'll have a number that's closer to final on the year, right? It takes that long. If that number goes up anymore, we won't be revising the big brewers numbers. So if the total was a little bit better, if the industry wasn't down quite as much as 3.6%, it'll be all in craft, right? So that number could be revised, it might be a little bit better. And I think that's why BART is sort of in the more like, craft looks a little bit more like flat, and we're like, we don't have the barrels for that, is basically where it comes from. Yeah.
The other difference is, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
He's getting some case room data.
We have very little tasting room data, and that's the volume
That's what
that doesn't show up.
That's what I'm missing, because
Yeah.
he's getting a lot of the data from the 5,000 people that respond.
Being reported directly. Exactly.
We're taking this off of-
Right? Basically, the way we sort of back out all others in craft, right? We back out from, we've got a total, and we take out the big guys. He is sort of fed the small guys only, and sort of builds up, right? While we sort of take away. It's the basic difference.
So let me give you another thing, so you don't get too negative about it.
Go ahead, Frank.
You go back 2 slides. No, 1 slide, 1 more.
Jeez, Fred, who's running this presentation?
So, one thing I'd just like to point out to everybody in the room is that craft share is obviously down, but a big point to retailers is that dollar share. Okay, so a lot of retailers look at, and they count dollar ring, so that dollar share is really important. And that's one of the things we ought to be talking about, is we're still 11% of the dollar share of all beer, and that's a positive.
Yeah. When we do most of the scan data that I'll show you, I'll do by dollars rather than volume, right? We sort of, Bart gave me a little dig this morning, you might have heard, Beer Marketers Insights, right? We report dollars a lot in the off-premise, and that's because that's what the retailers care about, right? Like the grocery store only care, as Fred said, about that dollar amount. So price increase, I don't care how you're getting it, give me the dollars, thank you very much. Meanwhile, demand sort of a little bit different. Okay, what's next? I forgot. Oh, craft. Top craft suppliers. This is back to barrels, back to volume. A lot of these are self-reported, not all of them. Some of them are estimated. Some of the bigger companies, they don't tell us. And I know this is really tiny, but I wanted to get them all in there for you. This is basically everybody, every company that ships over 100,000 barrels of craft. Again, craft is being measured. There's 29 companies on this list. That's about 13 million barrels of craft beer, or beer that's sold as craft in the country, if you want to talk about it that way. That's about half the segment or so, just in the top 29 companies. AB is at the top here. That's all. There's like, at this point, there's like 30 or some odd brands under the AB craft portfolio now, and that's about 2.3 million barrels, and that doesn't include Shop Top. Note that Molson Coors, MC, without Blue Moon, is like right in the middle of the pack. Blue Moon is just over about 2 million barrels a year. Kieran Lion is the clear number 2. Again, that's New Belgium, Bell's. They easily passed Boston Beer last year, and they're getting close to that 2 million barrel mark. The news yesterday was that they just acquired the brewery in Virginia that was built for Ballast Point. It's like a very large facility built by Constellation for Ballast Point, which they then sold Ballast Point, so they don't need the brewery anymore, so they sold it to New Belgium. Anyways, and the other one to pay attention here is Sapporo, which acquired Stone last year. Sapporo also owns Anchor and Unibrew, which is the Fenton that comes down from Canada. If you add the imports into that, right, Stone's about 350,000 barrels. Sapporo is about equal. And so Stone will be brewing a bunch of the Sapporo import volume. Won't be an import anymore, it'll be brewed in their brewery in Virginia. And again, total craft down 4%, maybe a little bit more, 1 million barrels, fuzzy. Anyways. Now let's go over to how these brand families performed in the off-premise scan data. And as you can see, it was really the New Belgium show. Not very many plus signs in the off-premise. In fact, just 4 of the top 20 craft brand families grew in the off-premise last year, either by dollars or volume. New Belgium's obviously the big one. It is now bigger than Blue Moon in this data, up 21%. Athletic was the number 2 grower, not even on this list because it's counted not as craft, but as non-alc. The number 2 player behind Heineken USA, Heineken 0.0 in the off-premise, and it's gaining on Heineken hardcore. Again, you might have seen on the last chart, 170,000 barrels of athletic beer last year, and still growing double digits. Goose grew dollars, but not volume. It is also sort of following New Belgium into the big IPAs and convenience stores, which you're also going to get tired of me talking about. Victory is sort of following, growing with a Belgian triple, Golden Monkey, in a sort of similar way. Sierra got pretty close to flat. You'll see on the next slide that Hazy Little Thing is now bigger than Pale Ale. And Stone grew volume, but not dollars. It's actually the only brand family in the top where we saw the price go down a bit. That they sort of shift their whole pricing architecture, doing a lot more larger packs, a lot more cans, lowering the average price per case. The on-premise return was helping offset a bunch of this in the first half of last year, but not so much in the second half of last year, which is why we saw all of those shipments trends pretty negative for the year in total. When we look at the individual brand trends, again, lots of negative signs. In fact, only 6 of the top 25 craft brands grew nationally last year, and 4 of them were Voodoo Rangers. Get ready. Notice that 2 of these, the top 3 now, the Voodoo Ranger Imperial IPA, which is number 2, and Sierra Nevada Hazy Little Thing, which is number 3, are pretty new brands. These are companies that have essentially had to reinvent themselves and remake their portfolios in order to figure out how to grow, right? How to keep attracting new consumers. Just over half of this list is IPAs, obviously, but you also notice that, just because it's an IPA doesn't mean it's growing anymore. A lot of the older IPAs that have been around for a while also struggling. Another thing to point out is that all 4 of the top brands, even though Blue Moon Belgian White and Sam Adams Seasonal declined in terms of dollars last year, they still gained share. They still did better than the segment as a whole. We are seeing this more and more. I've been doing this for about 13 years, and I spent 8 of them saying, like, on repeat, that big brands lose share, big brands lose share, small brands gain share, right? That was during the fast growth period. The big stalwarts in craft were losing share because all the small guys were coming up and eating their lunch. That has now shifted, especially in this data, right? The grocery stores, convenience stores is a sort of different beast, but in grocery, where craft is really important still, it has much more than 11 share in grocery actually, it's closer to 20 of dollars. We are seeing, as Bart mentioned this morning, grocery stores are cutting back craft space and they're focusing on the bigger suppliers, the bigger brand families they know they can depend on. That is a very difficult place to sort of get yourself in as a smaller, newer brand, especially if they haven't worked with you before. Just want to call out Kona Big Wave. AB now thinks of this as a mega brand, which is sort of fascinating because it's like not quite that big yet. But in terms of draft, they're pushing it hard. So be on the lookout for this Kona Big Wave push, especially on draft in the coming year. It's already happening. You're probably already seeing it. They're coming hard.
Quick question. The
Oh,
previous slide you mentioned that Victory was up. Particularly with
Gold Monkey
Monkey
and the
Band.
variants. Yeah.
Was that Victory specific or was that ABV?
Victory specific.
Okay.
ABV as a whole, sort of a different place.
From that.
Yeah, it was like.
Still pretty tiny.
I mean, because Victory and Southern Tier were sort of in a similar place, and I don't remember those numbers, our estimates for those numbers, because anytime a bunch of brewers sort of come together under either a larger family, like a big brewer family, or a private equity firm, they get a little bit cagier about reporting exact numbers to us. So, surprise, surprise. Yeah, but Victory did well. Again, it's mostly Golden Monkey, because bigger beers are selling a whole lot these days. Yeah.
I don't know if this is sort of a stupid question, but
Not at all.
who really decides what goes into the store, the supermarket or the local beer
The
shop?
buyer.
No, but
Yeah.
I mean, the distributor orders the beer, stocks the beer, and then distributes the beer, but how do they decide? Supermarket doesn't decide, this is what we want?
Supermarket does decide, technically. It's a complicated question that I could talk about for a full hour on its own, but I will try to give you the short version, right? Basically, in this data, it's mostly chains, right? So we're talking about chain retailers, including Wegmans, but also like ShopRite, Stop and Shop, and each of those stores will have a buyer, and they sort of make a decision. But often what happens is they appoint a category captain, which is an industry member, usually a big brewer, who sort of gives them recommendations of, this is what I think your shelf set should look like. And that buyer has the ultimate deciding factor of whether they say, yep, that's cool, rubber stamp it, and other buyers who are a lot more choosier. And that will depend on the chain, right? Different buyers in different chains, go about that in a different way. Some of them will just say, yes, category captain, we trust you. And others will be a lot more sort of choosy. You will also see some chains that are a lot more regionally specific, right? Well, they'll say, our whole chain for our whole footprint should be like this, and I'll give you local managers a little bit of wiggle room, right? And again, depending on the chain, that wiggle room could be tiny, or it could be a little bit bigger for local brands. Does that make sense? And then they order based on that shelf set from the wholesaler, who then sort of brings in
So there's a
stuff.
certain percentage of space that's usually kept for like ultra local.
Yes, exactly. And what's happening, what we're seeing is because craft isn't growing in this world, that right X% of space is getting slimmer and slimmer and slimmer. Oh yeah, the thing we actually have to talk about is Juice Force. Because it broke the record that was set by Voodoo Ranger Imperial IPA. The voodooification of New Belgium. So, Juice Force is the Voodoo Ranger Hazy Imperial IPA, clocks in at 9.5%, that was introduced just over a year ago in January of 2022. By the end of last year, it was the 10th largest craft brand by dollars nationally, and for the last 4 weeks of the year, it was number 4, bigger than Sierra Pale Ale or Hazy Little Thing. It was also, nationally for the full year, the number 4 craft brand in convenience stores. In fact, About 60% of its sales is in convenience stores, where most of it is sold in single-serve 19.2 ounce cans for an average of about $3 a can, usually on sale for two for $6. That is a 19.2 ounce can of 9.5% ABV Imperial Hazy IPA for $3 at the 7-Eleven. This year, the follow-up is Fruit Force, which is the fruit punch version of Juice Force. It was released in January. It's already a top 30 brand nationally, and it's number 21 for the last 4 weeks, basically for February, in convenience stores. It is on essentially the exact same trajectory, and oh, by the way, it's not taking a ton away from Juice Force or Imperial. These are the top 5 Voodoo Ranger brands in the context of New Belgium and the broader company Lion Kirin, also compared to Fat Tire down there at the bottom. Some things to call out. One, the combination of just Imperial and Juice Force last year, about 130 million in sales for the year. That's around 60% just in convenience, right? So this is the first time, as Bart mentioned this morning, that we are seeing a craft brand lead in convenience stores, right? Convenience stores didn't sell craft very much at all for a very long time. It was a tiny sliver. And as he said this morning, this is the brand that is breaking through, and they're doing it with high-strength single serves of IPA. The top 2 brands, again, Imperial and Juice Force, are over half of total New Belgium dollars in scans last year, closer to 60% of New Belgium's business for the last 4 weeks of the year. They are taking over this company's portfolio. And they are all of New Belgium's growth. The top 5 Voodoo Rangers alone, and there are more Voodoo Rangers than this, are about 80% of New Belgium dollars and 60% of Kirin Wine. Again, Bells didn't grow last year. This is where all the growth is for this company. But of course, they're not the only ones doing this at this point. And there are 2 sort of sets of insights that they talk about, that New Belgium talks about what's making this work, right? And one of them is the whole branding thing, right? Like one of them is this, like, is the Voodoo Ranger, is this skeleton guy. Sort of funky, weird, wacky, animated skeleton dude. He, I believe is an NFT. I'm fairly certain you can buy NFTs with him. Yeah. I could be wrong about that, but I think they're there at this point. Yeah, so like, it's the brand thing, it's the sub-branding. They're not selling New Belgium anymore, they're selling Voodoo Ranger, right? And so we've seen lots of other breweries sort of figure out, okay, well, we can do a sub-brand too, right? Not sell the brewery anymore, but sell this sort of sub-brand. A lot of them are pretty IPA focused as well. The company, nobody, not in this room or any room I speak in, can spot a trend and figure out how to follow it faster than AB. This is what Goose Island is, the bear with the sunglasses. That's Goose Island these days. I don't know if you've seen that yet. That's the Beer Hug portfolio there. Imperial Hazy is the tropical Beer Hug. You can't really read it. It's 9.9% ABV, not to be outdone. And then if you haven't seen it, this is what Devil's Backbone looks like these days. Do you remember when Devil's Backbone was sold around here like 8 years ago or so? It's like, it was sort of classic craft, like nature and like style forward. It's like Vienna Lager, Schwartz beer. That was what Devil's Backbone did. Now it's superhero deer. That's so random. And I say that like that's what it's attracting Gen Z, right? It's like, how do we do this sort of offbeat, irreverent, sort of weird, colorful, unexpected, that's so random, to attract the younger drinker. There's also the style thing, right? It's not just the sub-brand thing, it's also the style thing. 5 Imperial IPAs at the beginning of this year. That's Voodoo Ranger Imperial, Juice Force, and Fruit Force, as well as Sierra Nevada Big Little Thing, and the Beer Hug, the Tropical Beer Hug, the Goose Island. Gains 5.5 share of craft dollars at convenience, and are now over 13% of every dollar spent on craft beer in a convenience store, or on 5 Imperial IPA brands in the first 2 months of the year. And there are many more entering this space. Now, before you take all of this as some sort of recommendation, I have to point out that every craft trend, starts at small breweries. Every craft trend starts at small breweries. Every craft trend starts at small breweries. Like, I wonder where New Belgium got the idea to sell big cans of hazy IPA, often with colorful cans with like irreverent branding. Like, small breweries have been doing this actually for quite some time, mostly out of their tap rooms, mostly in 4-packs of 16-ounce cans. They're just doing it in a different place at a different price. That's another thing that we have to talk about here. The other thing that's going on is that New Belgium is spending a huge amount more on marketing than most breweries. Not just most small breweries, but most breweries. And in fact, it's more like spirits. So Steve Fetchheimer, who's the CEO, he's talked to us about this a couple times. He comes from the spirits world. He was in spirits for a long time and then moved over to New Belgium. And he's talked about how we need to ramp up our marketing spend so that it's more in line with the kind of money that big distillers spend on their marketing. So here's Diageo. Diageo is the biggest distiller in the world. It makes about $8 billion in sales of its spirits in just North America alone. That's what it did in its fiscal 2022. It spent $1.5 billion, or 20% of its net sales, on marketing alone during that fiscal year. I don't know how many of you have 20% of your net sales just sitting around still, ready to be spent on marketing. But my guess is probably not many. Because also, this is my very rough and dirty, like just sort of back of the envelope sketch of what a lot of brewery sort of finances roughly look like at the end of last year. So basically, maybe you did pretty well, especially in your tap rooms, revenue's up a little bit, maybe not so much, and so it's down a little bit. But whether revenue is up or down, your costs are way, way, way up. And that means that your operating margin is squeezed and your operating income, right, the money that you have to do things with, is probably down quite a bit. Which means you have less money to spend on those ad and selling expenses, the things that are below the line, and you have some wiggle room from year to year, right? You basically have less money to do the things to actually promote your beer and compete with the likes of Diageo or New Belgium. Yes, right? So this makes it even tougher to play in these big channels, right? To sort of go after that off-premise growth, get into that grocery store, and certainly play in convenience. Lost myself. Oh yeah, styles. We have to talk about styles quickly, but I'm gonna glaze over this. I forgot to start my timer. I have no idea where I am. Okay. The strong stuff is growing. All of these Imperial IPA numbers are driven by the Voodoo Rangers. It's completely skewed by those brands. So really, it's just a repeat of everything I've said. But IPA is now around half of all dollars spent in the off-premise on craft. And again, it's the strong stuff that's growing. Of course, so is the other end of the spectrum. So is NA, non-alcoholic craft. And as Bart said this morning, craft is a bigger chunk of the non-alcoholic beer world than it is of the total beer world. This makes complete sense to me. Because who are the people that are going to non-alc and what are they looking for, right? They over-index towards craft drinkers, towards people looking for flavor, looking for something interesting. And that's growing and growing all the time. Athletic is obviously the big winner. It has all three of the top non-alcoholic craft brands are Athletic brands. Sam Adams, just the haze, is number 4, and it's now the number 5 Sam Adams brand. But you have tons and tons of others. What about the middle, right? Last year I heard again, year of the lager. Not in this data, right? In the off-premise scan data, in the grocery stores, it's not happening. But I think it is happening in tap rooms, and it is happening a bit more in the on-premise, right? I think that sort of the lager story is a bit more a draft story, which, as far as I'm concerned, is not a bad thing. What am I going to fill the weird little space at the bottom there? Not beer. I'm going to give you some trends on the spirit-based RTDs. Spirit-based RTDs, canned cocktails, are up 60%, but they're still really tiny. They're like a third the size of hard seltzer, right? So they're like It's not a huge deal nationally yet, at least in this data. And the most amusing thing about the whole RTD spirits space is that the two lead players in it are not distillers. You've got High Noon is the biggest player by far. It's over a third of RTD spirits, and it's a Gallo product. Gallo, sort of, the biggest one of the biggest wineries in the country, if not the biggest, makes High Noon. And then AB is the number 2 player, with Cutwater, which used to be a little brand called Ballast Point. Right, it's Constellation got the brewery, and then AB got the spirits company. It's very confusing. And then Neutral, which is their sort of High Noon fighter that is more seltzer-like. RTD is now number 7 and growing very quickly. Yes?
Are you seeing anything with mocktail cans?
They're out there, lots of them. Right, and it sort of matches interest in cocktails, interest in non-alcoholic. Why can't I marry that? Yeah,
Soda. Basically.
sort of. Right now, now you're just sort of entering the non-alcoholic beverage space, which is also super competitive.
Yeah.
And we have a newsletter that covers non-alcoholic beverages, and there is so much other than the big, right, soda, energy drinks, water, cool. Everything underneath that is so messy and in flux all the time that canned mocktails sort of play in that space. Yeah.
The spirit space RTD data, is that nationwide? Or how does that compare to New York State?
That is nationwide, and it is also in tracked channels. And so, as you know, most the wine and liquor stores where you can buy spirits and wine in New York are generally not sort of big chain stores. Right? A lot of them are pretty independent. Some of that is by regulatory design. And so they're less likely to be in this data. But there are plenty of states like California, for instance, where and Texas, where that's not the case, where they're sold right in the beer aisle alongside. So in those places, when all of the beverages are sold in the same stores alongside each other, they are way bigger and sort of outperform than in states like New York, where they are kept separate, which is precisely why you were seeing distillers introduce bills to get these brands into the same stores, not just taxed like beer, but also sold with beer in these stores. And that's also why you see many people in the beer industry, even AB, who's the number 2 player, say, no thank you to those brands. A quick look at draft. Bart did a way better job with this data this morning because he did a deeper dive. But basically, what it looks like in 2022 is that we still have a draft world that is 20% below where it was in 2019, which is a lot of room to make up for. Tap rooms, which is sort of the premise used, which is a very rough estimate of tap rooms, it's not perfect. As we talked about with Brett before, it's hard to count those, especially for the government, it takes a while. But it's sort of, they are the bright spot in craft, right? They are the silver lining, that is where the strength of craft remains, where a lot of the growth remains, which is a good thing, since that's what the vast majority of the brewers, probably in this room and in this country, focus on. But outside of that, the world gets real hairy real quick. That volume was up about 2% last year, and is up 19% versus 2019 still, and is over 8 times what it was a decade ago. What am I saying here? Oh, right, this is why I think the strength of tap rooms is, right? It's about that community gathering space, it's about digging deeper into the community, it's about also the profits, right? It's way easier to make money in the tap room than anywhere else, right? So that's why it's a great thing. But again, the sort of broader draft picture is very, very tough right now. And again, the growth there does not offset the decline of the rest of the draft world. I'm going to dig into some Northeast regional scan data. The Northeast region, it's not New York, not just New York. Pennsylvania is also in here. All New England is in here. And so you have segments over there on the left. Basically, the beer segment in terms of dollars was flat in the region, while craft was better than it was nationally. And just look at that, is almost 30 share of the dollars in the Northeast. That is way bigger than the 11 share that it is nationally. right? So you are in a region where craft is even more important to these retailers than it is on a national level. Some New York brewers to call out who are growing. I sort of bolded the ones who are from New York on the right side. That's like the top 20 or so craft brand families. You have Southern Tier down a little bit, Montauk growing, now inside the, Tilray just bought them. Brooklyn had a good year last year, Sloop had a very good year last year. These are some other growers. You have Big Dick's, big strong, New White's gonna do it. Other house, very strong, industrial arts up a little bit. I have a feeling that's a trap. Just have a hunch that's a trap. I know. And this is what it looks like at the brand level. So these are the top 10 brands in the region in craft, and then a bunch of sort of New York brands that are in the sort of top 50 or so. Some things to call out. First of all, Sam Adams is way bigger here than it is nationally. Sam Adams has been falling down this list nationally for a long time. The fact that there are 3 of the top 5 brands are Sam Adams brands, and all of them did, comparatively well. I mean, Boston Lager not so much, but the fact that you have seasonal up 1% and the variety pack up 1.5% last year is really interesting. And also, by the way, other big national brands like All Day, Sierra Pale, and Lagunitas IPA were all down last year, but way outperformed their national trends in the Northeast. That's an interesting sign, and actually a little bit of a bright spot. I've been reporting on other states where it's not like that, where it's worse. Also got to note Allagash White, this is their home region as well, bigger than Pale Ale here, as well as Lagunitas IPA and the Lightning Cool Seasonal Shandy. Also note that there's not a single Voodoo Ranger in that top 10, nor is there a single AB craft brand in that top 10. Also fascinating in this region. Then you also, again, you have Sloop, Montauk, and Big Ditch in the top 50 and all up double digits last year. Some other New York brands had a tougher time last year, but so did literally half to 60% of the segment. And again, Athletic has the number 25, 34, and 45 craft brands in the Northeast, also one of their home regions, and growing very quickly, most of them up way more than double digits. When I sort of zoom out to the macro picture and focus on, in terms of not just craft beer, but beer, but focus in on New York, 2 metrics here. This is per capita beer consumption per 21 plus adult, 2017 to 2021. I don't have the 22 data yet. It'll be a while before I do. But as you can see, the green bar is the US and the orange bar is New York. New York drinks less beer per person than the rest of the country. You are in a state, thank you New York City, that is just sort of less developed for beer than the US average. And part of that is because New York State drinks a lot more spirits. So this is absolute alcohol consumption. We take the shipments data for spirits, wine, and beer, we average it out by ABV, divide it by the number of 21 plus adults there are in the country, and it gives us the share of the absolute alcohol, quote unquote, per person, or at least per 21 plus adults. And you can see back in 1970, first of all, we drank a whole lot more per person, and it was, beer and spirits were evenly split. Nationally, spirits was smaller then, but it was closer. And then consumption dropped through the 80s. That's when we saw the 21, the age went up to 21. We also saw lots of the 0.08. Lots of alcohol policy came in nationally in the 80s. And then taxes went up in 1990. So by 2000, total consumption was way less than it was 20 years before. Then over the next 20, and right, you saw spirits get hit the most over that period, because beer did better. Over the last 20 years, spirits have gained ground. And in 2020, and I don't have the 21 data for this yet, because this takes even longer to finalize. By 2020, spirits and beer, like the drinks, were about the same share in New York State, right? Beer was still well ahead of spirits in terms of share of absolute alcohol. Actually, I'll show you what it looks like on a national level. Even in 21, beer was well ahead. In New York, spirits is already right even with beer. On the left, you have dollars. This info comes from Discus, or the Distilled Spirits Council. On the right, you have share of, again, that absolute alcohol consumption. Discus reports that in 2022, spirits dollars, the money spent on spirits in the country, was bigger than beer for the first time. You can see that blue bar catch up to the orange beer bar over that period. And again, in terms of volume, it got really close. 20 years ago, beer had a 30-point share lead by dollars and by volume. That is now completely gone on the dollar side and down to something like 5 points on the volume side. And now we have this thing called cannabis. There's a question about it from Bart this morning, and I wholeheartedly agree with his answer. It was 100% accurate. We have not seen an impact, really a negative impact, on consumption when states legalize. The thing I want to focus on is the other thing he was talking about, which is perception. So the Gallup poll, you might be familiar with the Gallup poll. They ask lots of surveys about just about everything. And they've been asking people about their drinking for 80 years. They started asking people, do you have occasion to consume alcoholic beverages? In 1939, and the percent of people who say, yeah, sometimes, has basically been flat at like 63%. Sometimes it's as high as 67%. Sometimes it's as low as 60% or 59%. But it's been basically the same the whole time, including the last few years, including in 2022. They asked this question, though. They asked a different question about alcohol and about cannabis. They said, hey, this alcohol stuff, do you think it's good for people who use it and good for society as a whole, or bad? And they asked the same question about cannabis, and these were the results. This shocked the hell out of me when I saw these results coming, where you had basically 2/3 to 3/4 of American adults said, oh yeah, alcohol, definitely bad for people who drink it, and definitely bad for society. Where results on cannabis were pretty evenly split. Now, you're gonna be shocked when I tell you right now that people who have tried cannabis were overwhelmingly more likely to say, oh yeah, this stuff is fun. While people who have not yet even tried cannabis were like, oh no, that's bad. Totally makes sense. But even a majority of drinkers, when asked by Gallup, said, oh yeah, I do it. It's bad for me. Bad for me. And this sort of blows my mind a little bit. I write about alcohol policy a lot for us, and this is not a good sign for alcohol policy. People overwhelmingly think, oh yeah, bad for society, definitely bad for society. Now, I wonder, is this what people think is the right answer to the question, right? Like, when people take surveys, like, a lot of times they maybe don't necessarily say what they really feel, but they feel what they're supposed to answer. There could be some of that going on. But you might recall we've also been through, a good 3 years of being hammered with the message throughout the pandemic that everyone's depressed, everyone's getting wasted, and it's killing them. Has been the overwhelming media coverage about alcohol since the onset of the pandemic. And that is by design. The folks in the public health world who would love higher taxes, less access, and restrictions on marketing have been telling that story. They've been studying it, and they've been telling that story. I read their studies, I cover them for us. Not all of them are great. Some of them way overestimate the amount of consumption that goes on. I like a lot, because there's not enough alcohol just in the market for it to happen that way. But what is real is the harm, right? What is real is that people are hurting. And that is a hard narrative to sort of combat for the industry. So as I say, alcohol has a bit of an image problem right now, especially vis-a-vis cannabis. I don't even remember. Oh yeah, there's like 1,000 other things that we could talk about, and I'm gonna stop talking now and take questions if you have them, because I think we're probably also about out of time.
So back to the alcohol, because I was at a
Yeah.
event recently where there was probably 10, 30 somethings that I was talking to.
Yeah.
And all of them went that whole thing, that they weren't drinking in January. And one of the things they felt alcohol is really bad for you. And look at all the recent studies, it says it's bad for you, quote unquote, it's the next cigarettes.
No safe level, next cigarettes, absolutely.
It's the next cigarettes, and my comment was that's bullshit, people have been drinking alcohol forever. And they looked at me and basically said, well, your age, you fucked anyway. So. I think it's a really scary thing because these were people that actually are in the liquor industry. And they were all, I'm gonna cut back because this is dangerous. And I don't wanna be the cigarette.
That's the overwhelming narrative.
Yes.
Yeah, you want to comment on that too?
Separate comment.
Okay,
That is also very scary to me. It's a separate comment on this. I'm from state of Minnesota.
Yeah.
Sorry, if you're not familiar, we've done something kind of strange there where we legalized
Something batshit crazy.
we legalized cannabis, but it's also allowed breweries to put it into non-alcoholic beverages. And as a bright spot, most craft breweries have seen 20% to almost 100% growth in some cases by packaging non-alcoholic cannabis beverages, beers, wines, spritzers, etc.
Is there like a regulation on how much cannabis can go in?
5 milligrams per serving, but you can do up to fill it 50 milligrams in a canister as long as it has gradations on it or a serving is marked.
It's real wild. It's real wild.
We're worried about alcohol.
Minnesota had had the best
And
year.
I was like, my sense is that it's not going to stay that way forever because they were already being like, wait a second, we agreed to what? I voted on that bill, but I didn't realize what I was like. Wild thing. On both of those, so to sort of link the two of them, since I spent a huge amount of time thinking about these topics these days, it basically, that narrative, the no safe level narrative, is the public health narrative. And they have been very successful getting that in print and getting people to believe that, right? They say there's no safe level of alcohol consumption because it raises your risk of cancer slightly. It does, that research is real. I'm here to tell you that alcohol is linked to, I believe it's 7 or 8 different types of cancer. The one that is most concerning and that there is the biggest link to is breast cancer, in fact. But second, right, they are using that to make the argument that no one should drink ever at all. Canada lowered their recommendations to from sort of US similar in like the 10 to 14 drinks a week for men and a little bit less for women to 2 drinks a week is the recommended consumption in Canada now. That's the federal government guidance because they have used the cancer threat to change that policy, right? To change that recommendation. Yeah.
I thought there was a Harvard study that came out that a drink a day actually, you live longer. There were longevity studies that show a drink a day actually will increase your
There is, the basic research is essentially that light consumption, which is just 1, maybe 2 drinks a day, and that's really strict on that. Is generally associated with longer life. There are lots of folks that sort of pick apart those studies and say, you haven't sort of corrected for all the confounders, and it wasn't the alcohol. My personal take, and this is not me speaking for anybody but Chris Shepard here, is that, okay, it probably wasn't the alcohol. It was probably some of the other things that go along with drinking. Because there are also lots of studies that show that people who are more social, sort of go out more, have more social networks, and i.e. drinking socially, are way more healthy than other people, right? That loneliness and social isolation is like really bad for our health, like really, really bad for our health. And so my gut says, I haven't studied this, but my gut says that, okay, maybe it wasn't the alcohol that helped, but it was some of the other things that went along with it, especially and most importantly, social drinking, right? Like going out and having a drink with a friend or a couple of drinks on a Friday night is actually probably not so bad for you.
We have time for one more question.
Oh no! I'm gonna bring up my last slide just because you might you might have ideas, policy, M&A, deals. We can talk about that. We can talk about more policy if you want to. You can ask me about anything else that we haven't talked about. And this deck is yours. Thanks for keeping time. I just talked through most of the time.
Do you have any research on export, from people in Europe and stuff? Because they're having a craft beer boom that we had. Are they wanting our beer? Is it something that we should be thinking about as a group that okay, it's maybe going down here, but Europe loves drinking, smoking, and whatever. So should it be something that we're thinking a trend, the trend is going to more beers being exported?
I have a two-part answer there. One, yes, there is demand for American craft beer, because American craft beer is a real damn thing, just ask Brooklyn Brewery.
Sure.
They export a huge amount of
Yeah.
their volume.
But let me just caveat that, because they did it really,
Oh, yeah.
the one at Trademark's awesome.
Yeah.
The other thing, they have relationships with Carlsberg and
Canterbury.
Keurig, and it's a two-tier system. So, Carlsberg all through Europe,
Yeah.
they own the bars, so it goes right from brewery to bar.
Yeah.
So Sweden, they do almost in many cases, and having had a son that studied there, every bar you go into, there's Brooklyn,
Yeah.
and there's only 4 or 5 taps.
Yeah.
So
Exactly. It's a tough road to hoe, I
distribution,
would say.
Yeah.
Yes, there is a market, but it
I want
it
to
is
say
tough.
teas and put it, yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I would say is Europe is way further along on that whole no safe level of drinking and instituting. Scotland has a minimum unit price that they passed a couple years ago, so you can't price below a certain point. Wouldn't be a problem for craft, but they're now looking at a marketing ban on any sports. No alcohol advertising related to sports. I'm sorry, what? Ireland is looking to put a cancer warning on labels. By the way, you are going to see that proposed in the US from public health this year. I don't think it'll happen, but it is going to be proposed. I try not to make predictions, but I'm very confident in that one. Ireland's doing it, even though Italy and France are screaming bloody murder about their wine. Ireland doesn't
Yeah.
care, and the European Union said, we're cool with it. So they are way further along on listening to public health than the US is. Thank you, folks. If you want to get everyone,